Blood Inc., A Symphony of Deception. Welcome to my new psychological thriller about betrayal, justice, and the price of truth on my channel. If this twisted journey into darkness captivates you, please show your support with a like and subscription. The Journal. My name is Ethan Blackwood. I'm 36 years old. And just 1 week ago, I was nothing more than a former Special Forces captain trying to navigate civilian life with my wife Miranda, a 32-year-old literature professor with honey blonde hair and a laugh that used to make my soul lighter. Now, staring at the battered journal lying before me, I'm struggling to comprehend how an ordinary piece of morning mail transformed my existence into a waking nightmare, and the woman who shared my bed for 3 years into a stranger whose capacity for evil makes even a battle-hardened soldier's blood run cold. Sometimes the most dangerous predators aren't lurking in the mountains of Afghanistan, but behind the walls of your own home, wearing the face of someone you love. 1. Running is my sanctuary, my daily ritual of cleansing. Even the civilian version of my life demands this discipline. 5 kilometers around the neighborhood perimeter, same route, same pace. The predictability I've meticulously constructed since leaving the military. Returning home with an empty mind and pleasantly humming muscles, I noticed the corner of a thick brown package protruding from our mailbox. Strange. In Seabrook, mail arrives after noon, and it was only 7:30 in the morning. I slowed my pace, automatically scanning the street with the hypervigilance that never quite leaves you. The Wilsons walking their border collie, elderly Mr. Finch watering his immaculate lawn, 3 children on bicycles heading toward school, an empty white van with a catering company logo parked 50 meters away, new, hadn't seen it before. A young mail carrier with earbuds stood 2 houses down, sorting through his delivery bag. Nothing suspicious, but intuition, that faithful bitch who'd saved my life through 30 combat operations, was now whimpering softly at the base of my skull. I stopped short of the mailbox, pulled out my smartphone and snapped several photos of the package from different angles. No identifying marks except my name and address printed on standard laser paper. No stamps, no postmarks. Hand-delivered then. I gripped the package with 2 fingers, feeling its contents through the thick paper. Something hard and rectangular. A book, weighing about a pound. No unnatural thickening, no wires. The thin packaging wouldn't conceal a detonator. At home, I pulled on latex gloves from the first aid kit, an old habit from evidence handling. A thin knife carefully opened the flap. Inside was indeed a book, an old, weathered journal bound in leather, untitled. I flipped through it, holding it above the counter, approximately 200 pages filled with handwriting. Setting the journal on the kitchen table, I opened to the first page. What I saw stole my breath. Calligraphic handwriting described with disturbing precision the murder of a young woman in a hotel room. Not fiction, a technical report. Suffocation with a pillow. Resistance duration. Residual reflexes of the dying organism. Arterial pressure. It was documented with the clinical precision of a military field manual, but interspersed with literary flourishes capturing the victim's emotions. It was beautiful and revolting in its beauty. Flipping through several more pages, I realized I was holding a chronicle of 6 sequential murders, described with anatomical accuracy and poetic sophistication. Dates in the upper corners indicated the last 3 months. But the real shock awaited me further in. 2. The journal's margins were filled with meticulous feminine handwriting. Technical clarifications, professional comments, suggestions for improved methods. Knife not as effective. Better to use acid. Too much blood for confined space. I might not have recognized the handwriting. Should not have recognized it. But when you've reviewed your wife's handwritten lesson plans every week, signed greeting cards together, read her notes on the refrigerator, you infallibly identify every curve of her script. It was Miranda's handwriting. My wife, who taught American literature at Seabrook University. The woman who suffered a breakdown when I accidentally ran over a squirrel in our driveway. The person with whom I'd planned to raise children. Shock paralyzed me for several seconds. Then the operative instinct kicked in, never jumped to conclusions. I retrieved an old greeting card from the drawer, signed by Miranda last year. Compared each letter, the angle of the slope, the characteristic flourish above the I in the name Ethan. No doubt remained. This wasn't just her handwriting. This was her professional script, clear, calligraphic, developed through years of academic work, not her casual, everyday scrawl. She had made these notes carefully, thoughtfully. These weren't random scribbles. I poured myself whiskey. At 9 in the morning. One swallow. Then I did what a special forces operator does in a situation of uncertainty. I began gathering intelligence. For the next 2 hours, I photographed page after page, paying particular attention to the margin comments, then thoroughly examined the binding for fingerprints, fibers, or other traces. Nothing. I hid the journal in a secret compartment beneath the floorboard in the garage, one of 3 hidden caches in our house that even Miranda didn't know about. An old operative never abandons professional paranoia, even in married life. Especially in married life. 3. I didn't wait for Miranda to return from work. Instead, I called Morgan, my former comrade now working in criminal investigations. Set up a meeting at a bar where the music played too loudly for anyone to eavesdrop. Ethan fucking Blackwood, Morgan crushed my hand in his grip. It's been ages. 18 months, Alex. I sipped my beer, though alcohol was the last thing I needed right now. How's that research paper on serial killers coming along? Stalled, he grumbled. Stupid idea to begin with. How about you? Wife still too damn good for a grumpy bastard like yourself. I didn't share my suspicions with Morgan completely. Told him I was conducting personal research for a writer friend working on a crime novel. I needed information about recent unsolved homicides in the city and surrounding areas. You know, Morgan drawled, squinting at me with one eye, I could say this violates protocol, but what the hell? We've got a real headache brewing these last 3 months, a series of bizarre killings. Different methods, different victims, no connection except for a strange, poetic quality to the execution, like the killer is experimenting with different styles. My heart skipped a beat. How many victims? 6 confirmed. Maybe more, he lowered his voice. We're keeping it quiet, but many details are too specific. This is either a lone wolf or a group with specialized knowledge of anatomy, someone with medical training. Or someone married to a teacher who spent her youth in the autopsy room with her pathologist grandfather, I thought. Miranda often spoke of how her grandfather instilled in her a love for science. But I didn't say this aloud. Instead, I asked Morgan to send me the basic dates and details of the crimes. He agreed under one condition, no discussion with anyone whatsoever. I gave my word. That evening, after Miranda fell asleep, I created a table on my secure laptop. Left column, dates and details from the journal. Right column, information from Morgan. 5 of the 6 murders matched almost perfectly. The 6th had no official date of death. The body was found too late. But the methods, locations, all details pointed to a single source. Then I noticed a pattern that made my stomach clench. The journal didn't just describe murders, it was an evolution. Each subsequent crime incorporated improvements suggested in Miranda's margin comments on the previous entry. The killer was learning and perfecting their craft. And my wife was their consultant. 4. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done since my service days. I launched a covert operation, this time targeting my own wife. Called in sick to work, citing family circumstances. Told Miranda I was driving to the neighboring state for a security consultation. Instead, I took up position in a rental car 100 meters from the university where my wife worked. At 3:30 p.m., Miranda emerged from the building, but instead of her usual route home, she headed in the opposite direction. Urban surveillance had always been my forte. Even with modest training, an ordinary civilian has virtually no chance of detecting a professional tale. Miranda, despite her keen intellect, didn't have the slightest chance. She arrived at the Verse and Chapter Cafe in the Bohemian district. Literary club meetings, photography exhibitions, poetry readings, where the local intelligentsia gathered. Not the best place for a clandestine meeting, too many attentive eyes. I made a mental note. Either Miranda didn't understand the seriousness of her actions, or this was another level of conspiratorial tradecraft, conducting meetings in plain sight. 10 minutes later, a young man in his early 30s joined her table. Long hair gathered in a careless bun, worn leather jacket, intelligent glasses in thin frames, the quintessential creative type. They exchanged greetings like old acquaintances, but there was something in their gestures, in the fleeting touch of hands, that made my stomach tighten. I chose a table far enough away to avoid attention but within earshot, concealed my face behind an unfolded newspaper, borrowed a pen from the waitress, and pretended to solve the crossword. Classic but effective technique. The structure of the second chapter limps Julian, Miranda's voice sounded like in her literature classes, professional, with a note of superiority. You're rushing to the climax. The suffering should build gradually. I thought slow suffocation was too conventional. Julian nervously rotated his cup in his hands. Conventional because you're describing the process, not the sensations. Listen, Miranda's voice became softer, more intimate. The first 30 seconds, the victim experiences pure panic, adrenaline skyrockets. Then, around the second minute, oxygen deprivation induces euphoria. Consciousness begins to blur, fear subsides. This is the key moment of transition between life and death, understand. Here you need to slow the narrative, let the reader feel this. Weightlessness at the boundary of existence. Her words sounded like what might pass for artistic enthusiasm, but I sat close enough to see the dilated pupils, slight flush on her neck, tiny beads of sweat on her upper lip, physiological signs of arousal that wouldn't deceive a trained eye. Miranda wasn't just consulting. She was reliving the experience, savoring every detail. "What about the theory of merging with the character?" asked Julian, lowering his voice. "Oh, that's the most challenging part." Miranda leaned closer, and I strained to hear. "A true writer must not just imagine their protagonist but become them, feel their impulses as their own. Only then does the text become authentic." The master says. The crash of broken dishes at the next table interrupted her mid-sentence. To my disappointment, after this they switched to more innocuous literary topics. The surveillance continued for 2 days. Miranda met with Julian daily in different cafes. I recorded all details of their conversations, but nowhere was there a direct admission of murder, only strange, ambiguous discussions of creative process and immersion in the material. On the third day, instead of meeting at a cafe, Miranda drove directly to Julian's house, a small bungalow on the outskirts of town. She spent 2 hours there. When she emerged, her face was calm, professional, but I noticed the same unhealthy gleam in her eyes as when discussing suffocation. There was only one way to learn the truth. 5. I waited until nightfall. Julian's bungalow stood in a dimly lit alley, perfect for infiltration. Neighbors far enough away not to hear the quiet breaking of a lock, neither of the 2 surveillance cameras on the street covering the approach to the back entrance. I never thought the skills acquired in dozens of special operations would come in handy for breaking into a civilian's apartment in my own homeland. 5 minutes on the lock. No alarm system, typical carelessness of the bohemian crowd. Inside, silence, the subdued light of a lamp in the living room, the smell of old books and something else. A metallic taste I couldn't mistake. Blood. The living room looked like the office of an obsessed researcher. Walls covered with photographs, maps, newspaper clippings. On large cork boards, diagrams with red threads connecting various points. I moved closer, examining the photographs. Faces of people, locations, clippings from police reports. The victims. All 6 murders were meticulously documented, with photographs of crime scenes, maps of victim movements, time diagrams, and it all perfectly matched the descriptions from the journal. In the center of one board, a photograph of Miranda taken with a hidden camera. Around it, arrows pointing to various elements of the investigation. She wasn't an accomplice. She was the central figure in this scheme. But something didn't add up. Why would Miranda allow Julian to document her involvement? It contradicted every principle of conspiracy. Unless. Suddenly I felt that same metallic smell, but stronger. It came from the bathroom. My pistol slid into my hand as if by itself. I quietly approached the partially open door and pushed it with the barrel. Julian's body lay in the bathtub. Clothes discarded on the floor, he had been killed with surgical precision. One smooth motion that severed the carotid artery. Spatter on the tile wall indicated he was standing when killed. Then the body was carefully placed in the tub, allowing everything to drain into the plug hole. Professional work. Too professional for a university literature professor. Next to the bathtub, on the closed toilet lid, lay a stack of papers, weighted down by a blood-soaked scalpel. I carefully took the top sheet, trying not to leave fingerprints. It was a draft of the next journal chapter, written in Julian's handwriting. It described his own murder, with the same anatomical details, with the same poetic sophistication. But the story broke off in the middle. The last sentence remained unfinished. When the blade touched his skin, he felt a strange relief, as if all the previous months had been merely a prelude to this final act of literary. A smeared mark followed. The pen had slipped when the writer felt the knife at his throat. This wasn't just a series of murders. This was a book written in blood, where each new author became the final chapter of the previous narrative. And Miranda was neither victim nor accomplice. She was the editor-in-chief. 6. I returned home 2 hours before dawn, carefully erasing all traces of my presence in Julian's bungalow. The hardwood floor in our bedroom creaked softly under my weight as I slipped inside. Miranda lay on her side of the bed, her breathing measured, deep. I lay down, fully clothed on top of the covers. Closed my eyes but didn't sleep, listening to the night and contemplating what other secrets might be harbored by the woman lying 30 centimeters from me. At 3:15, the front door quietly opened and closed. The footsteps were almost silent, much quieter than Miranda normally walked. Coming upstairs, she carefully cracked open the bedroom door and froze on the threshold, studying the contour of my body on the bed. I feigned deep sleep, but through half-closed eyelids saw her figure in the doorway. She looked as always, my Miranda, with neatly gathered hair in a modest dress. Only her eyes were different, bright, feverishly gleaming in the half-light. "Ethan," she whispered, approaching closer. I mumbled something unintelligible and turned over, pretending to wake up. "Sorry I woke you." Her voice sounded normal, with the slight huskiness of fatigue. "It's 3 in the morning." My voice was a perfect imitation of sleepy irritation. At that moment I noticed what she was trying to conceal in the darkness. On the cuff of her white blouse, almost imperceptible in the dimness, specks of blood. A professional eye could distinguish them even in darkness, the characteristic pattern. Miranda intercepted my glance and casually tugged at her sleeve. "I'm going to shower, then lie down a bit more before I go work." She stood and headed to the bathroom. The final chapter turned out to be more complex than I thought. Through the cracked door I heard her turn on the water and begin humming. A melody from West Side Story, lighthearted, almost childlike. How housewives hum while doing everyday chores, not women who have just slit someone's throat. When she returned to the bedroom, she smelled of lavender soap and body lotion. Perfectly clean, without a single trace of what had happened. She slipped under the covers and turned to me, smiling that same smile that had greeted me every morning for the past 3 years. "I'm so tired but so happy," she whispered, closing her eyes. "Sometimes the right word changes the entire story. You understand?" "I understand," I replied, staring at the ceiling. And I truly did. In 16 years in Special Forces, I'd seen many psychopaths, professional killers, terrorists, sadists of all stripes, but I'd never met someone who so perfectly concealed their true nature behind a mask of ordinariness. Even worse, I'd slept beside such a person for the past 3 years and never once suspected anything wrong. My wife breathed quietly beside me, her face in sleep looking serene, almost childlike. But in my mind's eye stood Julian's body in the bathtub, his unfinished manuscript, and a room hung with evidence of crimes. I didn't know what connected us to these murders, but I was certain of one thing. This was only the beginning. Somewhere beyond the ordinariness of our life, a plan was unfolding, part of which I had yet to discover. I watched the sleeping Miranda and thought that there are things more terrifying than death on the battlefield. One of them is realizing that the person you loved never existed at all. The literary experiment. Waking the next morning, I lay motionless for a long time, listening to Miranda preparing for work. Familiar sounds, the rustle of clothing, the soft clink of a coffee mug, the light tap of heels on hardwood, now sounded like a false melody, an imperfect counterfeit of normalcy. Each new phrase seemed an illusion, a fragile construct concealing a darkness I'd never known before. After the front door closed behind her, I rose and headed for the shower. Standing under the scalding streams, I made a decision that changed everything. I was beginning a hunt for my own wife. 1. Surveillance requires a command post, a place from which to control the operation without risk of discovery. I deliberated at length before choosing a suitable location, my garage, transformed into a workshop for woodworking. Miranda never entered there, respecting my male territory. Her mindset was predictably traditional, another part of a carefully constructed mask. Equipment selection was limited to what I could acquire without leaving digital traces. Unlike official operations, I couldn't turn to staff technicians who provided everything necessary. Dexter helped, former communications specialist in our unit who, after retirement, opened a small electronics shop in the suburbs. Home surveillance, he smirked when I explained what I needed, eyes narrowed, scanning my face. Think she's cheating? Something like that, I answered with a stone face. No questions. He raised his hands in a defensive gesture. But I'll tell you one thing, Blackwood. Most guys who come for this kind of equipment usually find exactly what they didn't want to see. If he only knew. The system I assembled was compact but effective. 5 micro cameras smaller than buttons, wireless, with 10-day autonomous power supply, with motion sensors for energy conservation. Miniature microphones of the same class used for bugging diplomatic premises. Software for remote access to her laptop. Installing all this, I felt nauseating déjà vu, just how we prepared to capture terrorists in Kandahar. The difference being that now the target was my own wife. Device placement was calculated considering Miranda's habits. A camera in the lower corner of the bookshelf in her study gave a full view of the workspace. The second, in the ventilation grate of the bedroom. The third, hidden in the wall clock in the living room. The fourth I installed in an electrical outlet in the hallway, and the fifth in the lampshade of the nightlight on her bedside table. Microphones were distributed similarly, accounting for room acoustics. The pre-mounted system allowed quick installation while Miranda was at work. Professional skills didn't fail, 3 hours, and the entire system was perfectly calibrated, tested, and operational. No element was visible without specialized equipment. The most challenging part, infiltrating her laptop. Miranda was careful with passwords. The hack succeeded only because I knew her habit of writing complex combinations of symbols on the back of bookmarks. The bookmark in Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights contained the needed sequence. I installed the spy program in 17 minutes, twice as fast as planned. In the evening, when Miranda returned home, the system began working. I sat in the garage, looking at the section screen of the laptop, observing her every movement through the house. The woman on the screen resembled my wife. The same gestures, the same smile, the same habits. But now I saw behind this perfect imitation what lurked inside, a predator playing the role of a domestic animal. 2. For the first 3 nights, nothing happened. Miranda worked on academic papers, read, watched a series on her laptop. Nothing suspicious, nothing strange. I almost began to doubt my conclusions. On the 4th night, the pattern changed. At 1:28 a.m., Miranda suddenly awoke, as if to a silent alarm. Carefully slipped out of bed, ensuring I was asleep. Barefoot, she walked to her study and turned on the laptop, connecting headphones. I activated the remote access program. My screen displayed a copy of what she saw, a secure website requiring 3-stage authentication. The design minimalist, without identifying marks, black background, white text, simple forum interface. In the upper left corner, a symbol of an hourglass, an unusual choice for a literary community. Miranda entered a private chat with a user called the Pen Master. Their correspondence history numbered hundreds of messages, far more than I expected. Their communication had lasted at least 6 months, long before the series of murders. "The 7th chapter of Symphony is brilliantly completed," wrote the Pen Master. "Collector reviews exceeded expectations. They call your work innovative. They ask about the possibility of meeting the author." "The author prefers anonymity," Miranda replied. "How did the auction go?" "Closed at 1.2 million. Saudi Arabian collector. The council is impressed with your talent. Your preparation method creates unparalleled authenticity." My blood froze. These weren't metaphors or literary allegories. They were discussing actual murders being sold as works of art. "The immersion ritual before writing the 7th chapter went perfectly," continued Miranda. "The man was exactly as I imagined the character, the same intense gaze, the same restrained power in his movements. I absorbed his emotions and then transferred them to paper. A pity I had to part with such a magnificent source of inspiration." "This is the primary strength of our philosophy," replied the Pen Master. "True literature requires not only imagination but physical immersion in the material, the merger of author with character. Only by experiencing intimacy with one who is then sacrificed to art can absolute authenticity be achieved. Your style of combining eros and thanatos is truly revolutionary." I stared at these lines and horrifically understood their true meaning. Miranda wasn't just killing. She first seduced her victims, slept with them, and then took their lives. And all this in the name of a literary experiment. Continuing to read the correspondence, I discovered that Miranda sought her victims through a dating app, where she maintained a profile under the name Eleanor. She carefully selected men corresponding to character images for her book. Then came seduction, intimate closeness as immersion in the character, and finally murder, described afterwards with terrifying poetic quality and anatomical precision. Then the conversation took a new turn. "The final chapter requires a special character," wrote the Pen Master. "The cycle must close. We have found the perfect candidate, connected to the beginning of the story." "You chose him because of his connection to me?" asked Miranda. "Because of his connection to both of you. Poetic symmetry. He doesn't suspect his role in our project." A file was attached to the message. When Miranda opened it, the screen displayed a photograph of a middle-aged man with a military haircut and eyes I immediately recognized. Nathan Reed, sergeant from my former unit. The man who saved my life in Kandahar and became a military journalist after discharge. His past makes him ideal for the final chapter of Symphony, continued the pen master. Tomorrow he arrives in the city. Contact must be established according to the usual protocol. The immersion ritual must be especially deep, given the significance of this chapter. I understand, replied Miranda. I'll take care of it. 3. After 2 nights studying Miranda's correspondence with the pen master and other forum members, I finally understood the structure of the organization they called literary experimenters. This wasn't just a community of psychopaths united by bloodlust. This was a well-organized, hierarchical cult, combining literary ambitions with the darkest impulses of human nature. At the center of the structure stood the board of directors, anonymous patrons financing the project. A step below, curators like the pen master, selecting and guiding authors like Miranda. But the most shocking element was the ritual of character immersion. According to the club's philosophy, true art requires not only describing experience but physically embodying text into reality. Before each murder, the author must enter into an intimate relationship with the victim, absorbing their essence for subsequent transfer to paper. For this, dating apps were used to find people with specific appearances and characteristics. Miranda maintained a separate profile under the name Eleanor, presenting herself as a widow seeking consolation after losing her military husband. This legend attracted a certain type of men, protectors, often with military backgrounds, exactly what the plot of her literary project required. Each book had its theme. The current project was called Symphony of Solitude, and apparently was dedicated to military personnel and the psychological aftermath of combat. No wonder Nathan was chosen as the final victim, a military journalist writing exposés about corruption in the army. That evening, Miranda received a new message from the pen master. The subject has arrived in the city, staying at the Oriental Hotel. Begin the hunt. I watched as she opened the dating app, selected her Eleanor profile and began searching. Nathan was there, recently registered, indicated his real name and occupation in his profile. An unsuspecting victim, voluntarily revealing information about himself to a predator. Miranda sent a like to his profile, then a short message. Military journalist. My late husband served in Afghanistan. I've always respected people telling the truth about war. The hook was cast, the hunt had begun. What started as a murder investigation had transformed into a descent into the abyss of human perversion masquerading as art. And my wife wasn't just a participant. She was one of the stars of this bloody show. 4. The day after learning about the plans for Nathan, I decided to check Miranda's previous victims. Each murder in the series had its specifics, but now I was looking for a common denominator, the victim profile and traces of the immersion ritual. Using police contacts, I accessed photographs of the last 6 victims, men of different ages, professions, social statuses. At first glance, nothing in common, but digging deeper into their digital footprint, I discovered a pattern. All were registered on the same dating site. All 6 were seeking women of a certain type, intelligent, lonely, with an interest in literature, the exact profile that Eleanor fit. Something else emerged. Each victim was killed exactly 72 hours after first contact with Eleanor in the app. If this rule persisted, Nathan had no more than 3 days from the moment of their first message. That night, Miranda again sat at her computer. This time she opened a text document and began writing a plan for seducing Nathan. Clinically precise, step-by-step plan, where every detail was calibrated like a military operation, from the place of the first meeting to the words she would say, from the type of perfume to the pose in which she would sit. All calculated to play on certain psychological triggers, the sick meticulousness of a maniac. She thoroughly studied his biography, found photographs, studied his habits through social media, knew what coffee he preferred, what books he read, what movies he watched. All this was to help her create the illusion of a kindred spirit, randomly encountered in a bar. The plan ended with a section titled Immersion, where with the same methodical approach, the details of intimate contact were outlined, not as an act of passion, but as a surgical procedure necessary for absorbing the essence of the victim before their murder. I read these lines, written by the hand of the woman I'd lived with for 3 years, and recognized not a single trait of the person I thought was my wife. This was a document composed by a mind absolutely alien to everything human, cold, calculating, seeing in people only material for its perverted literary experiments. Nathan was destined for the same fate as the previous 6 victims: seduction, intimacy, murder, and all this in the name of creating authentic art. I felt a cold rage building inside. Not emotional, not impulsive. This was the calculating, focused rage of a sniper marking a target. 5. The next day I began identifying the pen master, the mysterious curator behind the entire operation. In Miranda's correspondence with him, there was little personal information but minor details, phrases, references to specific literary works, peculiarities of punctuation, provided clues for analysis. Additionally, one conversation mentioned that the pen master once rejected Miranda's first book. This significantly narrowed the search. In my wife's personal items, I found a folder with old manuscripts and rejections from publishers. Among them was a critical review from a renowned literary critic who signed under the pseudonym El Morro. The review style was caustic, humiliating. The author didn't just reject the manuscript but methodically destroyed the aspiring writer's self-esteem. Your prose demonstrates the characteristic female inability to understand the true depth of human darkness. You skim the surface of existential despair, afraid to immerse yourself in genuine abysses. This was the key. I began researching the identity of El Morro, a mysterious critic who never appeared in public, always wearing a mask at literary events under the pretense of protecting objectivity of judgment. Little information existed online, but one archival image caught my attention, a photograph from a literary award 5 years ago. El Morro, in a characteristic Venetian mask shaking hands with the laureate. On the critic's wrist was a scar, of a specific shape familiar to every military person. Such scars are left by thermite grenades. I'd seen similar marks on soldiers who survived close contact with this weapon. The next 6 hours I spent connecting various facts: a literary critic with a military past, a person concealing their face, an expert in anatomy and trauma psychology. These topics frequently featured in his publications. Miranda kept all issues of Literary Observer magazine where El Morro published. Reviewing these articles chronologically, I noticed another detail. The critic's style changed dramatically about 4 years ago. The language became more technical, detached, with special attention to physiological aspects of suffering. Interesting. Who exactly was hiding behind that mask? 6. Nathan wasn't answering calls. His number constantly went to voicemail, uncharacteristic for a man who always kept his phone at hand. This could only mean one thing: he was already in the city and possibly in danger. I activated the old military communication protocol, an emergency message to a special email with the code word Blizzard. We established this communication channel back in Afghanistan for critical situations. If Nathan checked his mail, he would understand this wasn't just a meeting of old friends, but a highest-level alarm signal. Meanwhile, Miranda acted with frightening efficiency. Studying her activity in the dating app, I discovered she had already established contact with Nathan under her alter ego Alina. Their first meeting was scheduled for tomorrow evening at the Anchor's Rest, a veteran-frequented establishment on the outskirts of town. The literary club's plan was simple and cruel. Miranda was to seduce Nathan, engage in intimate contact as part of the immersion ritual, then kill him, completing her symphony of solitude. I couldn't allow this, but acting openly was risky. I didn't know how deep the literary club's connections extended, who else might be involved. At 1627, a response came from Nathan Short in military cipher style. Sniper 1, contact confirmed. Meeting at Stone House, ETA 2200. Stone House, our code for an old hunting cabin in the forest, 7 kilometers from the city, a place known only to former members of our unit. At 21:45 I was there, having ensured I wasn't followed. Parked the car half a kilometer away, walked the rest of the way through the forest. The perimeter was clear, no signs of outsider presence. Nathan appeared exactly at the appointed time. He had changed over these years, grown a short beard, gray appearing at his temples. But his eyes remained the same, attentive, with that special gleam that comes only to people who have seen too much. "Ethan," he embraced me firmly, but the embrace contained wariness. Didn't expect to receive a highest alert code after so many years. "Nathan," I pointed to the table where I'd arranged the printouts of my investigation. "We have a problem, a big problem." For the next 2 hours I explained the situation, from the mysterious journal to the identity of the pen master. Nathan listened silently, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "Jesus Christ," he rubbed his eyes when I finished. "I thought my article would cause a stir, but I didn't expect to become a target for a maniac who turned out to be your wife. So what do you suggest? Go to the police?" "No," I shook my head. "They have too many connections. Even your FBI contact could be under their influence. We need to act independently." "Like the good old days," Nathan smiled weakly. "Just the two of us against the system." "No," I looked him in the eyes. "You'll be the bait." I outlined my plan. Nathan was to continue communication with Alina in the dating app, agree to a meeting, but under no circumstances remain alone with her. We would know all their plans in advance, thanks to my access to Miranda's correspondence. When it came to the invitation to a literary evening at a country house, we would be ready. I would take a sniper position on a nearby hill, providing cover. Nathan would go with a concealed microphone and weapon. Our goal, not just to prevent murder, but to gather evidence against the entire organization. "Too risky," Nathan shook his head. "If she seduced and killed 6 men, we can't underestimate her abilities. And what if the plan assumes she brings me to the country house already dead?" "That's exactly why you won't drink anything she offers and will always have an emergency evacuation protocol." I put my hand on his shoulder. "We've been in worse situations. Remember Kandahar? Then we didn't even have a plan." "All right," he nodded after a pause. "But I have one condition. If things don't go according to plan, you'll destroy this entire organization, at any cost, even if I'm not around." "I promise." I extended my hand, and we sealed the agreement with a military handshake, firm, with the characteristic pressure of the thumb on the wrist, a signal of absolute fidelity to the given word. After Nathan left, I sat in the cabin for a long time, reviewing the printouts and planning the operation. For the first time in a long while, I felt a strange relief. Now I had an ally. I was no longer fighting shadows alone. And also, I felt grim satisfaction that soon I would again be doing what I was created for, finding a threat and neutralizing it. On the way back to the city, I couldn't shake the thought of how ironic the situation was. For 3 years I tried to leave the war in the past, build a normal life. And now the war itself had come to my home, wearing the mask of my wife. Final operation, I thought. One more last mission. And this time it wasn't just about following orders. It was about restoring the boundary between truth and lie, reality and illusion, which I had so long considered my life. The trap. Planning the perfect murder isn't difficult. Far harder is planning the perfect trap to stop a killer before they finish their work, especially when the killer is a woman sleeping in your bed, a woman with a face you loved and a soul you never knew. Preparation for Operation Trap began long before dawn, with the first message Nathan sent to Elena from his hotel room. Haven't met a woman who understands the price of truth about war in a long time. Coffee. 1. Concealed body armor. Nathan doubtfully examined the tactical equipment laid out on the table in the cabin. Seriously, this is a date in a bar, not a raid in the Mojave Desert. I methodically checked the equipment. And this isn't a date, it's the first phase of penetration behind enemy lines. The dim lamplight accentuated new wrinkles at the corners of Nathan's eyes. He shook his head. Sorry for asking, but doesn't it hurt? You're talking about your wife like a combat target. I didn't raise my head from the microphone I was adjusting. Feelings, an impermissible luxury now. Later, when everything was over, I would allow myself to feel pain. Maybe. The woman I like never existed. My voice sounded even, too even. Miranda is a mask. Behind it lurks something else, something I never truly knew. Nathan silently nodded, accepting this truth. For the next 2 hours, we rehearsed the plan down to the last detail. 3 conditional phases: initial contact in the bar, field observation during the supposed seduction, and the final operation in the country house, the site of the planned murder. Nathan wore a concealed microphone of the latest generation, the size of a rice grain, sewn into the lining of his jacket. A transmitter with a 6-hour autonomous power source, in a metal belt indistinguishable from an ordinary one. GPS beacon in the heel of his left boot. On his right wrist, stylish watch with liquid analysis function. He had only to dip the steel buckle of the strap into a drink for the chemical composition to be immediately transmitted to my receiver, revealing the presence of drugs or poisons. Never drink anything you haven't seen being prepared, I repeated for the 3rd time. No open bottles, no ready-made cocktails. Even if the bartender prepares it in front of you, distract her and discreetly test the drink. I know, Nathan grinned. Not my first infiltration operation, Captain. But your first against a woman who has killed 6 unsuspecting men. The smile vanished from his face. How does she do it, Ethan? I mean, technically, she's your wife, not exactly. Fragile, I finished for him. That's your #1 mistake. Miranda regularly practices yoga more for flexibility than strength, but she's strong enough to hold a knife in the carotid artery. Besides, I opened the folder with her medical documents. In college, she studied pathological anatomy for 3 years, planning to become a forensic expert. Her grandfather worked in the morgue, instilled an interest. Only when her father died did she switch to the literature department. Career change due to grief. Or liberation from a restraining influence, I noted. Her diaries contain many entries about how her father wouldn't allow her to fully realize her literary vision. I handed Nathan a tiny injector, resembling a fashionable piercing ornament. What's this? Polyurethane foam capsule with a broad-spectrum antidote and central nervous system stimulant. If you feel numbness, dizziness, or just an intuitive danger signal, press it to your skin and push hard. Full dose is injected in half a second. 30 seconds later, you'll feel the effect. Like an adrenaline shock. Worse, but better than dying from Spanish fly mixed with fentanyl. That's how the second victim on her list died. Nathan thoughtfully rotated the injector. What are the odds I'll come out of this operation alive? 78%, I answered without hesitation. Adjusted for your physical condition, awareness, and support, that's much higher than we had in Kandahar. In Kandahar, we both thought we wouldn't survive, he smiled weakly. 90% probability of death. Remember what you said then. Means we have 10% for immortality, I finished his quote. It was our old joke. Strange that it still brought comfort. 2. on the roof of an office building across from the Anchor's Rest. I established an observation position 3 hours before the scheduled meeting. Thermal imager, directional microphone with parabolic reflector, digital binoculars with 60-fold magnification, standard surveillance equipment, modified for urban conditions. The temperature on the roof dropped to 4 degrees, but I didn't feel the cold. My body entered the familiar sniper waiting mode. Shallow breathing, minimal movements, all senses focused on the target. I observed the entrance to the bar, analyzing everyone entering and exiting. At 1942, the motion sensor installed on Miranda's jacket hidden by me in her wardrobe activated. She left the house. 8 minutes later, her car passed by the bar, circled the block, stopped in an alley behind the building. Classic perimeter check, not what you'd expect from a university literature professor. Miranda entered the bar through the back door. Gray coat, dark hair gathered in an elegant bun, minimal makeup. Looked as always intelligent, reserved, attractive in her quiet confidence. A woman easy to fall in love with, to believe, to trust. Through the directional microphone, I heard her exchange a few words with the bartender, a regular customer, well known. She took a table in the corner, with a view of the entrance and the emergency exit behind her back. A military habit I'd never noticed in her before. Against the wall stood a rack with literary magazines. She took one and began reading, periodically looking up at the entrance. At 20:00 exactly to the second, Nathan crossed the threshold of the bar. I saw him through the window, relaxed posture, free movements, broad smile for the bartender. Perfect imitation of a man who just came in for a drink after a long day. No signs of alarm or wariness. He ordered, took a glass of beer, and only then, as if by chance, noticed the woman in the corner. Theatrical surprise, a nod of recognition, as if remembering her photo from the dating app. He approached her table. "Elena," his voice transmitted clearly through the microphone. "I'm Nathan, we were messaging." "Of course," she smiled, gesturing for him to sit. "I think I would have recognized you even without a photograph." "Really?" "There's a certain confidence in the posture of people who have seen what you've seen." Her voice was exactly the same as I'd heard it thousands of times at home. Human, natural, back straight but not tense, a gaze that evaluates space, readiness for the unexpected. Nathan laughed. Professional deformation, hard to switch off the soldier inside. "And you shouldn't," she leaned slightly toward him. "It's part of you, who you are." "And who am I?" "A person telling the truth about war." She said it so sincerely that even I momentarily had doubts. Could this all be an act? Maybe Miranda truly admired Nathan and his work. For the next hour and a half, I listened to my wife skillfully conducting a conversation, penetrating, intimate, touching on aspects of military experience not usually discussed with civilians. She knew what questions to ask, knew when to remain silent, allowing Nathan to express what he had held inside for years. I observed her technique. Every 12 to 15 minutes a light touch to Nathan's arm, always at points rich in nerve endings, wrist, back of hand, bend of elbow. Gradual reduction of distance between them, mirroring his posture. These were all classic NLP techniques, which I myself used during prisoner interrogations. But Miranda applied them with such naturalness that they seemed like genuine expressions of sympathy. "Would you like to continue this conversation in a more private setting?" she asked after her third glass of wine, which she drank in small sips. "I have an amazing cognac at home that I think you'd appreciate." This was a deviation from protocol. The plan assumed that the first meeting would end with a simple exchange of numbers and an agreement to meet in a day or two. But Miranda was accelerating events. Perhaps she sensed something wrong, or was rushing to finish her project earlier. Nathan showed no surprise. "With pleasure," he smiled, but his voice, transmitted through the microphone, sounded tense. "My hotel is on the other side of town and I didn't take a car." I have my car. She placed her palm on his hand, not averting her gaze. I can drive you. Danger signal. The trap was closing too quickly. I discreetly activated the alarm sensor on Nathan's phone. 3 short vibrations, our code for retreat. He should have found an excuse to leave, postpone the meeting to another day. But Nathan ignored the signal. Great idea, he said, rising. I'll pay for the drinks. From my observation point, I saw them leave the bar. Miranda led him not toward her car, but in the opposite direction, down the street. Strange. I quickly packed up the equipment and began moving along a parallel street, maintaining visual contact with them through alleys. 3 blocks later, they approached a black SUV with tinted windows. Not Miranda's car. She took keys from her purse and opened the passenger door for Nathan. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, so imperceptibly that only a trained eye could catch it, then got into the car. The door slammed, and the SUV pulled away. 3. I followed the SUV at a safe distance, running dark. My motorcycle, prepared for surveillance, was quiet and maneuverable enough for urban conditions. The beacon on Nathan's boot worked properly, sending a signal to my phone every 30 seconds. They were moving not toward Miranda's house, but to the outskirts of the city. Highway, then exit to a secondary road leading to wooded hills. I kept my distance, relying more on the GPS signal than visual contact. Through Nathan's microphone came fragments of conversation, muffled by the engine noise. Miranda was talking about her country retreat, a place where she supposedly found inspiration for writing. Nathan maintained the conversation, but new notes appeared in his voice, unrecognizable to Miranda but obvious to me. He was on alert. "We're almost there," said Miranda, as the SUV turned onto a dirt road leading deep into the forest. "Just a few minutes left." Suddenly, Nathan's microphone began to give interference. The signal interrupted, distorted. After 30 seconds, it completely disappeared. A jammer. Someone had put an electronic shield around this territory. I increased speed, reducing the distance. To hell with conspiracy. More important now was not to lose sight of them. But when I reached the turn onto the dirt road, the SUV was already out of sight. Only dust, slowly settling in the moonlight. The GPS signal from Nathan's boot was still coming, but intermittently, with long delays. The last coordinates pointed to a location 3 kilometers deep into the forest. I turned off the motorcycle and hid it in the bushes. From here, on foot. Moving silently among the trees, I checked my equipment. Pistol with silencer in shoulder holster. Knife in boot shaft. Small tactical flashlight with red filter, not blinding in darkness. Infrared night vision goggles on head, still raised. All like in the old days, only the target different. After about a kilometer, the forest thinned, revealing a large clearing. In the center stood a country mansion, 2 stories Victorian style with a wide veranda, 8 cars in the gravel area. Light in the windows of the first floor subdued from the upper, none penetrates at all. The perfect place for what? A literary evening, a bloody ritual, or something I still didn't understand. I glided closer, using trees as cover. About 50 meters from the house, I noticed the first guard, a large man in a dark suit standing at the corner of the house. Characteristic pose, hand under jacket, definitely armed. The second guard patrolled the perimeter, moving in a circle every 6 minutes. Professional approach, almost military discipline. What kind of literary club has such guards? I slowly circled the house along the perimeter, remaining in the shadow of the trees. The backyard was equipped with landscape lighting, creating perfect patches of shadow between islands of light. In such conditions, even a novice could approach undetected. For me, it was almost too simple. Through infrared goggles, I distinguished another person on the second floor, a silhouette at the bedroom window, an immobile observer, possibly a sniper. Area of constant responsibility, backyard and part of the forest. At that moment, two men in evening suits and masks, Venetian, covering the upper half of the face, came out of the house. They lit cigarettes, conversing quietly on the terrace. "Final presentation will begin in an hour," reached me. "They say it will be something extraordinary." "The last chapter is always the most dramatic," replied the second. "And considering the connection with the author, we can expect a masterpiece." They were talking about Nathan, about the fact that he was going to be killed as the final chapter of some perverted project. I had an hour to find him and get him out of here. Suddenly Nathan's GPS beacon again began transmitting a signal, clear, stable. It showed that my friend was underground, in the basement of the house or some subterranean structure. I began looking for an entrance. The main doors of the house were guarded, first-floor windows probably equipped with alarms. But every building has weak points. Victorian mansions often have service accesses, ventilation shafts, inconspicuous entrances for servants. Circling the house once more, I discovered a small dormer window on the back side of the roof, partially concealed by overgrown ivy. The perfect entry point. 4. "Are you there? Copy." Nathan's voice in the earpiece was weak, breaking up but definitely his. "I copy," I whispered, pressing against the wall of the house. "Your status?" "Alive, but in a basement. Judging by the surroundings, medical laboratory or operating room." "Weapons, restraints?" "Disarmed, physically unrestricted, but I see no exit. Door locked from outside." "Miranda." "She left 10 minutes ago, said she would prepare the audience." "Ethan, there's something strange here. I thought this was a literary club, but it looks more like a cult. They have ceremonial robes, some symbols on the walls." The connection broke again. I cursed and continued advancing toward the dormer window. The path lay across a covered veranda, then along the construction scaffolding left after facade renovation, and finally, the final dash up the slope of the roof. I overcame the first two stages without problems, bypassing the guards' zones of visibility with mathematical precision. But when I was already on the roof, 6 meters from the window, an alarm activated. Not my fault. The alarm sounded from inside the house. Someone had discovered another perimeter breach, or was this part of the plan? I pressed myself to the roof, becoming an invisible shadow. The guards below began running around, communicating by radios. But they all converged on the main entrance, not looking for an intruder on the roof. Taking advantage of the moment, I approached the dormer window. Locked, but the old lock presented no difficulty. 15 seconds later, I was inside in a dusty, abandoned attic. In the attic floor, I discovered a hatch leading to the second floor. I listened. Silence. All the guards' attention, apparently, was focused on the first floor. Carefully opening the hatch, I made sure the corridor was empty and descended. The second floor was a suite of rooms, decorated with pretentious luxury. Everywhere stained glass windows, heavy velvet drapes, paintings in gilded frames, and books, hundreds of books in glass cabinets. But looking closer, I realized these weren't ordinary editions. Each book was in a unique binding of leather in various shades. Some looked wrong, too similar to human skin. Muffled voices came from behind a door at the end of the corridor. I carefully approached and listened. "Guests have already gathered in the main hall. The ceremony will begin in 20 minutes, a female voice, not Miranda's. "And our star is ready," male low with a slight hoarseness. "More than ready. She spent an hour in meditative preparation. Says this chapter will be her masterpiece. Our patron will be pleased. He has waited so many years for this moment." They were talking about my wife and some patron, probably the pen master, the mysterious curator who directed the entire project. I moved on, seeking a way down to the basement where Nathan was being held. At the end of the corridor, I discovered a small service staircase. Perfect. Descending to the first floor, I found myself in a small room, probably a pantry for servants. From here came the muffled hum of many voices. It seemed the main action was taking place nearby. A half-open door led to a corridor extending deep into the house. There was noticeably more activity, people in masks and evening attire passing by, heading toward the main hall. I needed another route, and it appeared almost immediately, an inconspicuous door on the right leading to another staircase now downward. Basement. The door was locked, but the lock yielded to the picklock in 40 seconds. I began descending, carefully stepping on old wooden steps. The staircase turned, revealing a long underground corridor with several doors. Lighting dim, but traces of recent renovation visible, new wiring, modern lamps contrasting with ancient walls. At the end of the corridor was a massive door. The lock clicked, the door slowly opened, revealing a room transformed into something between an operating theater and a theatrical stage. In the center stood a medical bed, nearby, stands with equipment for monitoring vital signs. Around the perimeter of the room, several rows of chairs arranged in an amphitheater. Perfectly white walls, surgical light directed at the bed, everything was prepared for some kind of performance. Nathan stood by the far wall, holding a young woman in a white coat. On the floor lay two men, clearly unconscious. "Knew you'd find a way to find me," he smiled, seeing me. "We need to get out of here, this place. It's worse than we thought, much worse." "You can explain on the way." I examined the doctor woman. "Can she raise an alarm?" "Not for at least an hour," Nathan nodded at an injection ampule on a tray. "I used her own sedatives. With the dosage, as you understand, I didn't skimp." We laid the woman on the floor and headed for the exit. But at that moment, the door to the operating room swung open, and Miranda appeared on the threshold. She was dressed differently than in the bar. Now she wore a long red dress resembling an evening gown, hair loose, flowing over her shoulders. In her hand, a strange metal object resembling an antique surgical instrument. "Ethan, my dear husband," she didn't look surprised. "I knew you would come. It was only a matter of time." Her voice sounded soft, almost tender, like when she used to say she loved me. But the expression in her eyes was alien, detached, as if I was looking at a perfect mask of my wife, behind which lurked something completely different. 5. Time shifted into slow-motion mode. I raised my pistol, aiming it at Miranda. She didn't move from her spot, only slightly tilted her head, studying me with the curiosity of a lab technician examining an interesting specimen. "You won't shoot," she said calmly. "If you wanted to kill me, you would have done it at home in my sleep. You need answers, and I'll give them to you." Her confidence was so absolute that, for a moment, I felt like a puppet in someone else's play. As if all this was part of a script she had written long before I discovered the journal in the mailbox. "Where are the other guards?" I asked, not lowering the weapon. "Why are you alone?" "Because this is my moment," she took a step forward. "My final chapter. No one should interfere with the creative process." Behind her appeared two figures in masks and dark suits. One remained at the door, the second slipped inside the room, holding a pistol with a silencer. "Except, of course, my editors," Miranda smiled, not turning to the newcomers. "They always monitor the purity of the experiment." "On the floor, both of you," commanded the man with the pistol. I didn't move. Nathan also remained standing, slightly shifting to the side to avoid being in line with me, a basic combat maneuver, increasing the zone of impact for the opponent and complicating aiming. "You didn't hear him," Miranda feigned surprise. "Strange. Usually people react to the threat of a weapon." "We're not usual people," I replied. "That's precisely why you're here." She came even closer, ignoring my pistol. "Ordinary people write ordinary stories. For extraordinary literature, extraordinary characters are needed." From the corner of my eye, I noticed Nathan preparing for a jump. His posture seemed relaxed, but I recognized this characteristic shift in the center of gravity, a fighting stance disguised as ordinary. I slightly lowered my hand with the pistol, drawing attention to myself. "You're sick, Miranda," I said, trying to speak evenly and calmly as if to a patient in acute psychosis. "You need help. All this," I swept my hand across the operating room, "isn't real. It's a fantasy generated by a diseased mind." "Oh, this is the most real thing I've ever done," she laughed, a terrible, empty laugh. "You know what's the problem with most writers? They describe what they've never experienced. Their sufferings are imaginary, their delights theoretical. I write in blood, literally." At that moment, Nathan attacked. With one smooth motion, he lunged at the man with the pistol, evading the line of fire and simultaneously knocking the weapon from his hand. I dived right, rolled, and shot the guard standing at the door. The silencer worked perfectly, just a dull thud and the sound of a falling body. Miranda didn't even flinch, as if expecting this. She simply stepped back, watching as Nathan broke the first guard's arm, then finished him with a blow to the temple. "Magnificent," she whispered with some perverted admiration. "Such elegant choreography of violence. A shame to waste it on these worthless extras." I aimed the pistol at her face. "Where's the exit?" "Everywhere and nowhere," she shrugged. "You understand that the house is surrounded, that as soon as you leave this room, you'll be destroyed. The question isn't whether you can leave, but whether you want to know the truth before death." "What truth?" "About who organized all this, who stands behind the literary experimenters, who chose both of you for the final chapter." At that moment, sounds of struggle and a single shot came from the corridor. Someone was approaching the operating room. "No time," Nathan grabbed my shoulder. "We need to leave." "Other exit," I turned to Miranda. "Where? A place like this always has a backup exit." "Behind the instrument rack," she pointed to the far wall. "Secret door. Leads to a tunnel that ends in the forest 100 meters from the house. But you won't make it. He's already coming." "Who?" "The pen master." Her eyes feverishly gleamed. Nathan ran to the indicated rack and began searching for the mechanism opening the secret door. I kept Miranda at gunpoint, simultaneously observing the entrance to the operating room. The footsteps in the corridor grew closer. Slow, heavy steps of a person who wasn't hurrying, because he knew his victim was trapped. "Found it," exclaimed Nathan, pushing aside the rack and revealing a low, dark passage. "Quickly." I began retreating to the secret door, not losing sight of Miranda. She made no attempt to run or attack, just stood, smiling like a satisfied author observing the development of her own plot. "You're coming with us," I grabbed her arm, "as a guarantee of safe exit." "I don't think so," she shook her head, looking me straight in the eyes. "My place is here, with him." At that moment, the operating room door slowly opened. Six. On the threshold stood a man in a military surgeon's mask, metal, covering the entire face. Tall, broad-shouldered, in dark attire resembling a surgical suit, but with elements of military uniform. In one hand he held a scalpel, in the other, a pistol. "We knew you would come, Ethan," he said, and at that voice the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. A voice I hadn't heard in 4 years but would recognize among thousands. "Major Harding," I exhaled, lowering the pistol in shock. The masked man slowly raised his hands and removed his metal face, revealing the real one, disfigured by burns, with the left part missing, replaced by some metal prosthetics. Right eye alive, left, a cybernetic implant glowing with a dull red light. "Not a major anymore," he corrected. "Now I'm the pen master." Sounds pretentious, I know, but in literary circles they appreciate such theatricality. Miranda approached him and stood nearby, looking at me with a triumphant smile. "You were the best sniper in the unit, Ethan," continued Harding. "Always finished the job. That's exactly why I chose your wife for this project." Nathan silently approached me and now stood to my right, ready for action. but I knew we were both paralyzed by shock from this revelation. Harding should have been dead. He died in an explosion in Afghanistan, or so we were told. The body wasn't found, but no one could survive such a fiery meat grinder. Or could they? Our bodies are maimed by war. Harding swept his hand across the space, as if presenting an invisible audience. But in the world of literature, we can create a new reality. This book is our vengeance upon a world that forgot us. From behind him emerged 4 more men. I recognized them all: Brenner, Zimmerman, Hall, Garcia. Members of my former squad, presumed dead in the same operation as Harding. "How?" I began, but Miranda interrupted. "You never told me the truth about your service, Ethan." Her voice contained reproach, almost resentment. "But they told me. Do you know how many civilians died because of your erroneous shots?" "That's a lie," I breathed. "Indeed a lie," confirmed Harding, stroking the scars on his face. "But a very convincing one. Convincing enough to make a sensitive writer with wounded pride become an instrument of vengeance. You had to suffer, just as we suffered." Harding ran his finger along his mutilated face. "Operation Hourglass was betrayed. Someone leaked information to the enemy. Someone who knew our exact position." "I didn't." "Oh, I know it wasn't you," Harding laughed. "I know exactly who did it." He nodded at Nathan. "Our valiant military journalist, specialist in exposés, a man who sold his comrades for sensational material." Nathan paled. "This is absurd. I never—" "They found a transmitter in your backpack," said Garcia, stepping forward. "After you supposedly survived the explosion. Accidentally happened to be outside the perimeter during the attack, right?" "It was an accident," Nathan shouted. "I went to replace the batteries in the radio. I didn't betray anyone." "It doesn't matter now." Harding waved the scalpel. "What matters is that the final chapter of our book will be written today, with the main characters as authors and characters simultaneously." At that moment a shot rang out, but not from my weapon or Harding's pistol. The bullet hit medical equipment next to the bed. Sparks from the short circuit distracted everyone. I instantly rolled behind a metal cabinet, pulling Nathan with me. "Rear cover secured, Captain," came a familiar voice from the secret door. In the opening stood Frost, another member of our squad with a rifle in his hands. "Frost," I couldn't believe my eyes. "But you—" "Explanations later." He kept Harding and the others at gunpoint. "These bastards perverted our brotherhood. Instead of protecting the innocent, they've turned into monsters." "Traitor," hissed Harding. "You were supposed to be with us. We trusted you." "I was with you," replied Frost. "For years I infiltrated your organization, gathered evidence, and now it's over. The literary club is closed." Time seemed to freeze. Harding, Miranda, and 4 dead soldiers on one side, the 3 of us on the other. Tension reached boiling point. Miranda was the first to break the equilibrium. She grabbed the scalpel that had fallen from Harding's hand and lunged at us, aiming for Nathan's throat. The final chapter must be completed. She screamed with a fury that transformed her face into a mask of madness. I caught her arm a centimeter from Nathan's neck, twisted her wrist, tore away the scalpel. Miranda writhed in my arms, hissing and spitting like a wild cat. At the same second, the gunfight began. Frost opened fire on Harding and his people. Nathan snatched a pistol from one of the fallen guards and joined the battle. I restrained Miranda, trying simultaneously to drag her to the secret door. She resisted with inhuman strength. "You loved me," she hissed, looking into my eyes. "Admit it. You loved me even when you learned who I really am." I didn't answer. What can you say to a woman who was the center of your life and simultaneously the embodiment of a nightmare? "Ethan, grenade!" shouted Frost, and I saw Harding pull the pin from a small cylinder. Everything happened simultaneously. I pushed Miranda aside, jumped behind a steel cabinet. Nathan dived into the secret passage. Frost fired a final burst from his rifle. The grenade exploded, but this wasn't an ordinary fragmentation grenade. It was a thermobaric mini-bomb, a weapon prohibited by all conventions on warfare. The air in the room instantly heated to the temperature of melting metal. The last thing I saw before losing consciousness, Miranda, standing in the center of the firestorm with outstretched arms, as if accepting the fire as a blessing. Her hair flared in a halo, the dress transformed into tongues of flame, but she continued standing, looking directly at me through the veil of fire. Her lips moved, pronouncing words I couldn't hear through the roar of the flames, but I knew what she was saying. The same words that ended the last chapter of the journal found in my mailbox. When fire consumes everything around, only pure truth remains. And the truth is that love and death are the only real things in this world of lies. Eternal remorse. The world didn't return to me at once. First, there was only ringing in my ears and a copper taste in my mouth. Then, sharp pain in my right shoulder and the smell of burnt plastic. How much time had passed? Seconds. Minutes. I lay, half-stunned, in an unnatural position behind an overturned metal cabinet that had taken the main force of the explosion. Consciousness returned along with the understanding that the grenade thrown by Harding wasn't what would have worked here, or perhaps someone had switched it to minimum power. Too little destruction for a thermobaric bomb. In this, there was no coincidence, only calculation. 1. A reddish mist still floated in the air when I tried to focus my gaze. A shot sounded in the smoke, dry, professional, with the characteristic click of a high-precision rifle bolt. Then another, and another. Someone was methodically clearing the room. I carefully moved to the side, peering into the clouds of smoke. The metallic echo of shots rang in my ears, bouncing off the basement walls. Brenner, right flank 20 degrees 3 meters, pronounced a quiet, calm voice. Garcia behind the overturned bed, wounded but active. I instantly recognized this voice and manner of giving target designations. Frost. Sergeant Caleb Frost, the best machine gunner in our squad, presumed dead along with Harding and the others. Rear cover secured, Captain. Frost's voice grew louder, addressing me directly. You can get up, perimeter under control. I carefully straightened up, keeping the pistol ready. In the smoke, the figure of Frost was dimly visible. He stood at a break in the wall, holding an M40A5 precision rifle with a thermal imager. The classic weapon of a U.S. Marine Corps sniper. My weapon. You okay? He asked, not taking his eyes from the scope. Another shot. Another target neutralized. Check Nathan, he's in the passage to your right. I quickly found Nathan, pinned by debris from the door but alive, with a gashed eyebrow and burn marks on his left arm. Helped him get out, not forgetting to keep the space around us in my field of vision. These bastards perverted our brotherhood, said Frost, lowering the rifle and coming closer. For years I gathered evidence, infiltrating their group. Thought I could stop them by legal means. You, all this time, worked undercover. Nathan's voice sounded incredulous. NSA, Section Z19, Frost replied dryly. After the explosion, locals found us. Harding was in critical condition, the rest not much better. NSA extracted us through their channels, closed information about survivors, wanted to use Harding for his knowledge of local groups. But he changed, started creating what became the literary club. And you, I asked, carefully studying the face of my former comrade. Officially dead, unofficially became a ghost tracking other ghosts, he nodded toward one of the bodies. Always knew they'd come for you, Ethan. You were the only surviving officer of Operation Hourglass, the only one who could reveal the truth. 2. We didn't have time to exchange further explanations. The door at the far end of the operating room crashed open. Harding, limping from a bullet wound to his leg, was trying to escape. I instantly raised my pistol and fired, hitting him in the right knee. He collapsed with a muffled groan, continuing to crawl toward the exit. "The bastard's still alive," hissed Nathan, picking up a weapon from the floor of one of the fallen guards. We moved forward, forging a path through the chaos. The smoke began to dissipate, revealing a picture of destruction: overturned medical stands, broken monitors, guards' bodies sprawled in unnatural positions. The surviving dead men from Harding's squad, Brenner and Hall, used debris from medical equipment as cover, alternately opening fire to hold back our advance. Familiar tactics, crossfire, preventing the opponent from leaving the zone of destruction. "Frost, left flank," I commanded, as if years hadn't passed since our last joint operation. "Nathan, with me, right trajectory." Nathan and I moved to bypass the main shooting zone, using close combat skills honed in countless urban conflicts. Frost provided sniper cover, consistently reducing the enemy's radius of action. "Stop shooting," Harding's voice suddenly thundered. "We have a hostage." He dragged Miranda from behind an overturned gurney, disheveled, blood on her face but still alive. She didn't resist, didn't scream, just looked at me with some detached smile, as if observing an interesting theatrical performance. 3. "One more step and I'll finish what I started." Harding pressed a surgical scalpel to Miranda's throat. "Although it no longer matters, the final chapter is complete, Ethan. I won." I didn't need to look at Miranda to understand. She wasn't afraid of the scalpel at her throat. I saw it in her eyes. She was part of the plan, perhaps even a more important part than Harding himself. "Let my wife go." My voice sounded even emotionless. I took a step forward, aiming the pistol precisely between his eyes. "Another step, and I'll finish the last chapter with her blood." The hand with the scalpel noticeably trembled, but Miranda's eyes remained calm. Why isn't she afraid? "You know what's most ironic?" I continued to approach slowly. "Your book is a complete lie. Harding used you." I didn't take my eyes off Miranda, addressing only her, ignoring Harding and his threats. "I never shot civilians, Miranda. It was Harding who gave the order for artillery strike on the village of Al-Hadira. And then, when it came time to answer, blamed the snipers." 4. Her eyes widened, pupils constricted. The first sincere emotion I'd seen throughout this nightmare. "But," he showed me materials from the official investigation. Her voice faltered. "Photos, video evidence. I read testimonies from survivors myself." "Forgery," I cut off. "Basic manipulation technique. He used your writing talent, your resentment after rejection by literary critics, your thirst for recognition. He made you into a tool." "Don't listen to him," Harding hissed. "He's trying to save his skin." But doubt had already crept into her consciousness. I saw it in the minutest details of facial expressions, in micro-expressions that even the most skilled liar cannot control. Subtle tension in the corners of the eyes, slight asymmetry in the position of the lips, almost imperceptible dilation of the nostrils. "If I only wanted to save myself," I continued, taking another step, "I would have shot you in your sleep the first night after learning the truth. But I wanted to understand, wanted to know if the real Miranda was buried somewhere beneath this mask." Nathan, understanding my strategy, imperceptibly shifted to the side, getting behind Harding. Frost held his rifle ready but didn't shoot, too dangerous, given the hostage's proximity. Suddenly, Nathan sharply jerked his head, pretending to notice something behind Harding's back. This simple trick worked. Harding was distracted for a fraction of a second, enough for Miranda to abruptly jerk and knock the scalpel from his hand. I lunged forward in a jump, slamming Harding into the wall. Miranda recoiled to the side, rubbing an abrasion on her neck. "You liar," Harding hissed in my face. "Always were. You abandoned us there in Al-Hadira, left us to die when you could have saved us. I pulled 4 men from under fire while you hid behind fortifications." My voice remained icy. "They didn't find you because you were the first to run, abandoning your people." I pressed the pistol to his temple. You know what they do with war criminals. 5. It doesn't matter, Frost suddenly said, putting away his rifle. He took out a special communications phone and dialed a combination of numbers. Objects neutralized. Proceed to phase symmetry. I recognized the abbreviation of the secret project. Symmetry, an experimental NSA program using neurotechnology for interrogating especially dangerous criminals. Officially closed 5 years ago as inhumane. Unofficially, it seems it continued to exist. Nathan looked at me questioningly, but I just shook my head. Some knowledge is better not to have. 20 minutes later, which we spent restraining Harding and neutralizing the remaining members of his group, a team of people in white coats entered the basement. They moved with mechanical precision, setting up equipment, preparing some devices resembling medical scanners. Harding, seeing them, suddenly changed expression. For the first time, I saw real animal fear in his eyes. "No," he howled, trying to break free from our grip. "Not this. Better kill me." I held him while doctors administered a sedative. Turned to Miranda, who with a detached air observed what was happening. "Now they'll become test subjects," I nodded at Harding and the others. "Each murder you committed will be reproduced in their consciousness, but they will be the victims. Forever. In a loop with no possibility of escape." "And me," she whispered, for the first time looking truly frightened. "What will happen to me?" I looked at Frost. He barely noticeably nodded. "You'll get your literary fame, Miranda." I allowed myself a cold smile. "Your Symphony of Solitude will become the most studied work in the history of neurophysiology. Every word, every emotion, every murder will be analyzed at the molecular level. You'll become a work of art." People in white coats began packing up equipment. One of them approached Miranda with an injection system. She didn't resist, just looked at me with an unreadable expression. "Did you love me?" she asked when the needle touched her neck. "Really?" I didn't answer. Some questions have no worthy answers. 6. 3 years later. Secret military laboratory somewhere in the Arizona desert. I passed through 6 levels of security before reaching the central research section. I'm met by Dr. Shepard, a neurophysiologist of world renown, officially killed in a terrorist attack 7 years ago. "She's in stable condition," says Shepard, leading me down a sterile corridor to a glass chamber in the center. "Brain activity phenomenal. Never seen anything like it." In the chamber, separated from us by soundproof glass, sits Miranda, an immobile figure in a white hospital gown. Her body entwined with dozens of sensors connected to various parts of the brain. Eyes open but empty, as if looking into another dimension. "Subject is experiencing murder scenario 43. Dr. Shepard makes notes on a tablet. "Self-reflection loop initiated." What does that mean? It means that now she's experiencing each death from the victim's perspective, then from the killer's, then again the victim's, and so on to infinity. Every murder she committed or described plays out in her consciousness with absolute neurophysiological precision. I silently watch my wife through the glass. Her face contorts with invisible pain, mouth opens in a soundless scream. Not a drop of compassion arises in me, only cold satisfaction from a perfectly functioning mechanism of retribution. "Now you truly feel every word you wrote," I whisper, though I know she cannot hear me. Dr. Shepard escorts me to the exit. At the doors, she hands me a folder with a report. "Your interview for the archive is ready, Captain Blackwood. Sign here." I review the final pages. My own words, spoken just an hour ago, have already transformed into an official document. The most accurate sniper shot I ever made was when I destroyed her soul while preserving her body for eternal remorse. I sign the report and step into the blinding light of the desert, leaving behind the darkness of military secrets and personal vengeance. In this bright world, neither Ethan nor Miranda Blackwood exist anymore. There are only shadows of the ghosts of Operation Hourglass, forever frozen in a time loop where love and death have merged into a single vicious dance. The most terrible weapon is not that which kills the body, but that which forces the soul to die eternally, never reaching the peace of death. If you enjoyed this story, please support the author with a like, subscribe to the channel, and share your emotions in the comments. Thank you.